The Mishnah we've been talking about with Rabbi Eliezer, who had said three things, which looked like four. The last thing we're going to do today is actually a difference of opinion whether it's one of the three or just an addition. It depends if we, as we had mentioned in the beginning, that the first part, which talked about honoring your friend, that you give your as precious as your own honor, and not getting angry. According to many commentaries, that was one thing goes together. So according to those opinions, the last part is going to be the third. Others did not put those as separate, and therefore this is going to be independent. So we'll see how that plays. Let me just put it on the screen for you here. Let me just get it there. There we go. Okay. So the last part of the Mishnah tells us as follows: Hevei mischamim kineged uran shel chachamim. A person should warm themselves opposite or before the fire of the sages. Vehevei zohir begachalton shelo tikaveh. And you should be careful, though, about their coals, that you shouldn't burn yourself. There's some strange language here. Their bite is the bite of a fox. Va'akitzasan, and their sting is akitzas akrav, is the sting of a scorpion. Ulachishasan, their hiss, the chishas saraf, is that of a serpent. V'chol divreihem, and all of the words are kegachle eish, like fiery coals. Interesting expressions. The descriptions are all to back up this idea about there's the fiery coals. There's something that you can get burned, you can get warm, depending on what you're doing. So v'hevei mischamim kineged uran shel chachamim. You should warm yourself by the fire of the sages. So start with Rashi, who he looks at it as listening to what they say, that if you should follow their laws and the things they tell us to do, and in that way you won't get burned. Because if we don't listen to them, then there's consequences, just like there are consequences for anything that we transgress. It's also consequences for transgressing the words of the sages. And in fact, Rashi says even small things that they said, which sometimes they had laws that are we'll call them, larger laws of things that you shouldn't do. But sometimes it's a minor. It seems to be a minor law. It says even something like that. If they said don't do it, then we have to refrain from it. Don't breach their words. Many of the commentators talk about these different animals. Seems that the teeth of a fox are sharp and also a little crooked. The bite somehow is harder to heal, so you don't want to get bitten by the fox. And the idea with how it would play out to get bitten by the sages, what exactly does that mean? So according to Rashi, it would mean that you should be listening to what they say, or else there are consequences. There's another angle to look at this, which is that when you're talking about a fire, so a fire does two things. One, it provides light, and it also provides heat. Now, the light of a fire, you don't have to be as close to benefit from the light of the fire. But the warmth of the fire, you do have to be closer to. If the fire's far away, you may see the fire, but you're not going to necessarily get any benefit from its warmth. So you do need to be close to the fire in order to benefit from the warmth. However, there's a catch. If you get too close, you can burn yourself. So the Rambam, for example, says when you're engaging in conversation, or you want to be with sages and leaders, he says, don't get too close. Don't push yourself in too close with them. Don't act arrogantly with them. You have to realize that sages and leaders are on a certain level, and we're on a regular level, and therefore, if we become too close to them in a way which is inappropriate and not respectful, so then we are taking away from their honor. And therefore, he says, when we join with them, it should be in a way where we want to be close, but you don't want to be closer than is appropriate. And therefore, only go as close as they indicate. And also, if they, sometimes when people push themselves into any situation, you annoy the people who you are pushing yourself into, right? Sometimes you have people who maybe, are not picking up the social cues. It's the same thing, not just in social things, but also in terms of being with people who are on someone who you should be respecting. Sometimes when we're not careful and we act in an inappropriate manner in a setting where we're supposed to be a little more formal, etc. So he says, then you can get yourself in trouble because either you look like a fool or you get reprimanded for your behavior. So he said the idea is with the fire, if you sit the proper distance away, then you can get the warmth, but if you get too close, you get burnt. Rabbeinu Yonah says along the same lines, but he also talks about the idea of the bites, etc. Is he says don't think that you can just if you did something against them, you can just appease them and you're going to say sorry and it makes it all better. He said, and also he says, don't argue with sages and say, well, listen, I can argue with Rashi, or but some people think that listen, Rashi was a person, he said something, or Rambam, etc. And I have my ideas. We said no, 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 we should not be thinking that. We don't think that we're smart. We have logical arguments, and therefore we're on the same level of them. No, we don't have that. We don't have that same level of wisdom. We don't have that same level of knowledge, and therefore their words are coming from a higher level of understanding and a higher level of logic and sharpness. And he says it comes from the fire that's burning inside them. This Torah is compared to fire. So they have a strong fire burning inside them, which represents the Torah. And according to Rabbeinu Yonah, as I said, this statement here is not part of the three items that were mentioned by Rabbi Eliezer. It's just an add-on. This is not something that you have to say every day or you have to think about every day. This is something you remind yourself every once in a while, and that's all that's needed. Another idea that the Pharisee Yisrael points out is that, again, the word or, the light, is, as I mentioned a moment ago, is Torah. Torah, we say Torah is or, Torah or. And again, you can see that light from afar, but you can't, in order to be able to get the warmth, you have to get close. So if you want to be able to learn Torah, you have to get close. And in order to learn from the sages, you do have to get close to the sages. Not too close, but close enough that you can be able to learn from them, both in terms of hearing what they say, but also in terms of seeing what they do, right? We also learn from the actions of the sages. And we want to see how do they conduct themselves in their daily life? How do they do things? And then we learn from that. Says, but on the other hand, be careful not to dishonor them, because otherwise, if we get too close, we could be disrespecting them. An interesting story is brought, a famous story about Rabbi Eliezer, who's the one who quoted all this, that it's a very famous story in the tractate Bava Metzia, where he had a dispute with the sages about a certain thing, and he pulled all kinds of miracles to prove he was right. And let me say, sages say it's too bad, majority rules, which is the rule, right, in terms of how we decide halacha. And he went so far, they ended up that the leader, Rabban Gamliel, excommunicated him. And he was very hurt by that. And the Gemara tells that what happened was that now Rabban Gamliel, by the way, was his brother-in-law. Rabbi Eliezer's wife was the sister of Rabban Gamliel, who was the leader, and Rabban Gamliel is the one who excommunicated his own brother-in-law because he felt he had gone too far in his opposition to the authority of the sages. And the Gemara tells you that what happened is that Rabbi Gamliel was on a trip and on a ship, and somehow it got into danger, and all kinds of things happened. Somehow other things, bad things were happening. And the Gemara tells us that his wife, Rabbi Eliezer's wife, did not let him say the Tachanun prayer. The Tachanun prayer is a complete to Hashem. And she did. There is a concept that someone who is a great person, Hashem hears them. And Hashem, in a sense, reacts to their pain. And when they're pained, Hashem wants to help them out. So she realized that if he is going to say this prayer, and he was so hurt by being excommunicated, that it could cause a problem to the people who hurt him, namely her brother. And so one day she wouldn't let him say this prayer. one day she wasn't around when he was doing his prayers, and he said the Tachnun prayer, and she walks in and he's finishing it up, and she says, "Oh, you just killed my brother." She says, "You killed my brother," and it turned out that Rabbi Gamliel had died, and he said to his wife, "How do you know?" And she said, "Because she had a tradition from her father's house that the gates of wronging never close, that Hashem is always listening to the tears, and he's always someone who was wronged, Hashem is always paying attention to." And here Rabbi Eliezer was wronged, and therefore there was reaction. Not that he necessarily was trying to make it happen, but Hashem was taking, in a sense, call it vengeance, if you will. So there's a cause and effect, and therefore a sage, their sorrow, their embarrassment is going to get a response from Hashem. So even if they are not actively doing something to say, "Oh, that person should be punished for what they did to me," Hashem is still going to be looking out for it, and therefore we have to be very careful in how we treat our sages in terms of respect. And we'll have to hold it there. Have a